Well, I mean, since you started, there have been a lot of changes at MoMA as well. I mean, there's been a lot of curatorial staff has been reshuffled. A lot of the older generation people have retired, became curators at large, such as Alana Hayes and Kinston McShine, and a whole generation of people that MoMA was associated with from the 60s onwards, where there was apartheid there. And I don't know if I remember this correctly, and also before it came, there was just, MoMA was also shuffling around to deal with the kind of departmentalization that it had to work with. So instead of kind of loosening the screws around departments, you had this kind of interdepartmental curator as a kind of a negotiator that would kind of operate over and on top of each department. I mean, that's one question is what's happening on this front right now. I mean, in terms of departmentalization and fragmentation of the institution, reverting to kind of disciplinary move. The second is more like where do you see now MoMA in the history of its narrative, which has been the index for pretty much for any institution throughout the 20th century?
I think we're at an enormously exciting transition. The institution is really run by the chief curators in many ways. There are 7 departments and 7 chief curators. And the remarkable thing at this moment with Peter Galassi's retirement as chief curator of photography is that every single one of those chiefs has been there 4 years or less. So it's an entirely new generation who maybe grew up with less disciplinary silos, with less of a sense of the canonical as being the truth, as opposed to one very powerful narrative, who grew up actually understanding that artists worked across disciplines, so that, for example, I mean, the disciplinary structure, when I first came there, I thought it was totally ridiculous. But again, that's because I came from a much smaller institution. I've now begun to think that, having, let's see if I can actually do this, a design and architecture department. It's one of the chiefs. A design and architecture department, a film department, a drawing department, a print and illustrated books department, a media and performance department, a painting and sculpture department, and I'm missing one. Well, anyway, you get the idea. That those were superficial. I mean, for example, where does an artist like Bruce Nauman fit? When I first went there, I went to the chief curator, Klaus Giesebach, of media, which since has become media performance. I think a very interesting change of name. And I said, why do you exist? I mean, shouldn't Bruce Nauman be in the painting and sculpture department? And in fact, Bruce Nauman's in a number of departments. There's a fantastic installation that he made with masking tape. It's in the drawing department. The new days that some of you may have seen at Venice the last time is in the painting and sculpture department, and then single channel videos are in media performance. So having said that, why do I think it's a reasonable way to proceed? There aren't really, I mean, you can't do away with totally with structure. You've got particular conservators who are assigned to particular media, and that's their expertise. You've got particular requirements for storage. For example, in the photography department, there's cold storage, where one copy of every contemporary photograph exists. We buy 2 when we're buying photography. So there is a kind of very practical reason for the departments, aside from the fact that Some people really love drawing and that's what they want to support, and we don't want to lose them.
That's a reason.
That's a very good reason. So I think what I've come to now is a sense that that's all great for behind the house. You know, that's a great operational administrative reality, but I'm not sure it makes any sense to have permanent galleries assigned to the various disciplines. What happens is painting and sculpture, which, you know, for historical reasons has been a dominant department. I mean, in many ways, Bill Rubin, when he was chief curator of painting and sculpture, was stronger than the director. That's shifting too now. You know, that is a kind of classical hierarchy. And so I think what's happening is that even in the painting and sculpture galleries, you're beginning to see a variety of works. And I think that's very healthy. We just acquired a remarkable collection, for example, of a Belgian collector, Herman Daly, which is perhaps one of the preeminent collections of conceptual art. It now is installed in the last painting and sculpture gallery. And consequently, you've got, you know, Dan Graham and Broders and a whole bunch of artists who don't make oils on canvas, ending a sequence that begins with, you know, Cézanne. And I think my hope is that that increasingly will be the story, and in fact, you know, we'll figure out a way even to incorporate film into those histories we tell.
I mean, you can always, you know, raise hands and butt in with your questions. We'd love to do that because it is not just not you know, two-way conversation. It could be a multi-way conversation. So just feel free any moment. Before that, I just want to ask if you just want, you know, just go this to another. Is it possible with the architecture you have at MoMA actually to uphold the narrative, to uphold the historical narrative? Because I mean, I remember in the older building, you know, there was only one way. You know, you had to start with Cézanne, or you end it with, you know, with the end of the narrative, and you couldn't actually reverse navigate the institution. It was very, very precise. And then with the new building, the architecture was working differently from the historical narrative. And I remember actually when, as the design was going on, I think it was Robert Storr at that time who was at the institution, who was thinking of, was imagining a secondary corridor, a counter narrative. You know, the institution building its critique of modernism as it went along. Because I mean, in any room now you have. I mean, I remember we had problems early on with the architecture. I don't know how you feel about it now. You're trying, you know, you're thinking of dropping the ceilings because they were too high.
I lost that battle.
Okay. And then there are too many entrances and exits to each room, so that you can't actually tell a story because it's damn difficult. You have three exits in each room. And how?
Well, the irony to that is, as I've come to understand, that was an attempt to make the narrative more porous. And what I think it made was galleries that are sometimes very ugly, and that you end up with corners rather than walls. But it's very easy to criticize the Taniguchi building, and it's kind of ridiculous too. It's there. We have to learn how to do it and work in it. You know, the interesting thing about MoMA that I've come to understand, despite its sort of canonical reputation, it's a highly self-critical institution. It's just that we don't risk experiments very easily. We really have to think our way through the whole problem. And I think my job is to sort of kick the can and just get things moving a little bit faster. But for example, I don't think Rob entirely succeeded at doing that. But if you were to come to MoMA now, I was talking to Luis Perez Ormas, who's a remarkable curator of Latin American art that works at MoMA, and actually he is the only geographically prescribed curator. We can talk about whether that makes any sense. I don't think it does, but it gets things going. But at one point, really Latin American art was in its own ghetto. It would have a small gallery. That doesn't exist anymore. It really is part of the overall history of modernism. You know, when I sit here and talk to you all, I feel like an idiot on some level, because these things shouldn't be so hard, and they shouldn't be such big problems. But when you work in a big institution, and an institution, I can't figure out actually what it is that holds us back from just blowing all the stories up.
But you don't stop growing. And just bought another building, you pretty much have the whole the whole area. I mean, not to mention PS1, and you know, you're going vertical, horizontal in all directions. And you were telling me that an average visitor
spends 5 hours.
5 hours in the institution. So it's an experienced institution. It's almost a day's work.